want to correct this a little bit. What's printed here is not accurate. Now, it doesn't really matter, except that the wind industry follows me everywhere, and they take things like this, and they're always trying to establish that I'm some part of some dark, nefarious connection. And so, where it says I'm the vice president of Wind Action in Michigan, Wind Action is a group in New Hampshire, and I am not part of them at all. It's my dear friend Lisa Lanoes. I know Lisa quite well, but I'm not a vice president there. She will be surprised to see that Dick's promoted me to vice president of the organization.
I are.
And I do have a degree from the University of Michigan, but not a business degree. And let me see. And I do not, I was invited among a number of private citizens to DC to talk about the production tax credit, but I wasn't there representing citizens groups. I'm not a lobbyist or anything like that. I'm a private citizen. You will know if I'm truthful in what I have to say if Avangrid or other wind interests release or hand out to people in your community a 7-page hit piece that was written about me by the Energy and Policy Legal Institute, or no, Checks and Balances Project. These guys jump back and forth from both groups. That says I'm paid by the Koch brothers and funded by all these dark, nefarious groups. I'm not, and my lawyer made that clear to them in a letter that we sent to them afterwards. But lately, when I've been speaking, a day or two later, somebody sends this article. You type my name in Koch brothers, you'll find it in 2 seconds. If the Koch brothers were paying me, I would just tell you. But the folks have offered to offset my expenses to come here, but I've missed 3 days of work to come. And I can tell you it's the compensation is appreciated, but it doesn't replace my lost time. And it doesn't pay me for the 10 years that I've invested in educating communities about the problems and hazards of improperly sited utility scale wind development. And people sometimes ask me, what's my net financial benefit been on all my talks and lectures that I've done since 2011? And my answer is 60,000 minus, because I spend a lot of my own time and money doing this, and it doesn't come back. How well do the wind industry experts do? I was working with some folks in Montana last year. Dr. Chris Olson, who's one of these guys who travels the circuit testifying on behalf of the wind industry, went to Montana twice and wrote a letter and made $100 grand for that letter. So that's the kind of money that you're playing with when you're on their side. So anyways, just want to be clear about that up front. So I'm a Midwestern boy. I grew up in Lenawee County, Michigan. I carry a map of my state with me, and it's right here. I live right down here, 5 miles from the Ohio state line. As I tell my friends there, I live close enough to Ohio to smell it, but I don't have to step in it very often. I'm a Michigan grad, so of course we have certain biases there, and I'm sorry about the football game this Saturday that's coming up, but I think we're going to win, even though Illinois is taking our old quarterback. So we'll see how that goes. Our county is usually number 1 in soybeans, number 2 in corn. Where I grew up, a little south of where I live now, you could look to the horizon about 16 miles and see nothing but trees and old barns. I mean, that's where we live. It's farm country. About 1,100 folks in my township. So we're country folks. That's who we are. And I feel a connection with rural communities wherever I go, because what I've learned is folks are folks. And my stupid jokes work just as well in North Dakota and Missouri as they hopefully will here tonight in other parts of the state, because we grow up living a similar lifestyle. We appreciate rural values, and more than anything, we appreciate community. And I think that's what makes rural folks unique, is that our communities sometimes last for generations. The old joke where we live is never get in a political fight with somebody in the township who has a road named after them, because you're probably not going to win, right? Well, that's kind of how it works. But I will say that I don't know of any other land use that destroys more of the rural fabric that we treasure than utility scale wind development. That's just what I've observed after being involved in this since 2009. I see meetings like this, and I see hostile meetings. I see angry meetings. I see people who don't go to church with each other anymore because they're very disturbed about the way wind development impacts their community. So that's my background. That's a little bit about why I'm here. So it's an honor to be here tonight. We also connected by one other thing, and that's that the Sauk Trail starts in Michigan and runs through the corner of my county. And so I parallel much of the Sauk Trail all the way here. It's been a big part of Midwestern history in the old Northwest Territory. And it's something that we all value and treasure. I have a history degree from the University of Michigan, and Michigan history is one of the things that I've spent a lot of time studying. Every community believes that what they have is unique and precious. And outsiders from outside the community may not value those same things in the same way. But guess what? We all get to value what we want to value in our communities. That's what makes us different. That's what makes us unique. And the things that are special to you may come across differently to others, but we get to identify the unique and special characteristics in our own community. And outside industrial interests may not like our definitions of the things that are precious to us. But as I will say later, there's an old rule in land use policy or zoning. We were here first. We get to decide. So hopefully when I finish my talk, you will have some more ideas in your head. And at some point, I hope you're going to be in a position to craft a new wind ordinance in this county. And I hope my talk will give you some ideas and the right kind of principles to move towards as you hopefully are able to undertake that process in the future. So, enough babbling. You've seen some of my credentials. I am a certified zoning administrator through Michigan State University. Developed ag preservation plan for our county, and I drafted a wind energy ordinance that became a state model in the state of Michigan when Governor Snyder had a list of those model ordinances. And you already know where this joke is going. I have a degree from the University of Michigan, but then again, so did the Unabomber. For what it's worth. Try never to take myself too seriously. And here's the list of ordinances, and our Riga Township ordinance is there at the bottom. Very proud of that ordinance, and I'm going to share some of the things that we thought made it unique and why it's a set of principles that I think good wind ordinances should have. Boilerplate, I'm not a lawyer, but I do watch Law and Order. I'm not offering you legal counsel. Developing wind energy ordinances that can withstand legal scrutiny is especially. It's important to retain experienced counsel in these matters. I'm not pretending to be what I am not. I will say, however, that I've spoken in 4 counties now in Illinois. I've been in Boone County, Ford County, Livingston County, and Morgan County. I guess now 5 that I've been here. So I've testified a lot of times in front of various county boards. Most of them have adopted some version of the kind of zoning principles I recommend. It looks like Morgan County, the money is going to prevail there, but the other counties have taken these principles very seriously and written laws that reflect them. I've already covered this stuff. I'm not being paid by dark. You know, it cracks me up. And Iberdrola Avangrid is a great example of this. I was testifying in front of the Public Utilities Commission in the Ohio Senate in 2012. And the person testifying, along with a representative of the American Wind Energy Association, was a representative from Iberdrola, now Avangrid. And they kept referring to myself and the people on our side as that group funded by fossil fuel interests. The fossil fuel crowd is telling you this, but we're telling you this. But Senator Seitz, the very intelligent chairman of that committee, he's an attorney, a brilliant guy, he says, wait a minute, doesn't Iberdrola own fossil fuel generation in Europe? And he said, actually, Senator, we own fossil fuel generation in the United States. So fossil fuel companies play the fossil fuel card against other people all the time, which just strikes me as the height of hypocrisy, but I like to share that every once in a while. Now let me throw this other thought out here. The wind industry and their advocates like to make this discussion in the zoning realm about how noble, green, and beneficial wind energy is. That's what they want to talk about. This is great for the kids, great for the planet. It's a great moral crusade we're on. They hide the fact that many of them are operating massive fleets of fossil fuel power plants, but that's where they want you to go with this. They don't want to argue about zoning principles, and here's why. The only issue that you're really facing in this county is how to safely place 50, 60, or 70-story tall noisy structures into a rural residential environment. Whether these structures produce green electricity, extract oil or coal, or turn sow's ears into silk purses is irrelevant. This is about separating conflicting uses of land and protecting health, safety, and welfare. Nothing more, nothing less. So we're not here deliberating on whether or not wind energy is good for your county or good for the planet. It's how do we take these noisy devices and site them in such a way as to not drive people nuts and not harm their future development rights. That's what it's really about, but they want to distract you with all this other stuff. And I don't know if there's any county officials here, but having sat at a planning commission table myself for 6.5 years and have a wind project brought in front of us, I understand the pressure that it's like in the community. The farmers or the large landowners really want this because they see $8,000 to $12,000 a year of income for them that doesn't require them to plant and harvest. I understand that. That's not a trivial amount of money. And then I know folks who thought, when I bought my property here, the zoning didn't permit anything like this. Our master plan didn't talk about anything like this, so I bought here, I settled here, I was happy here, and suddenly, you're not talking about putting one large industrial device in, you're talking about putting 120, like they were talking in my community. Well, guess what? That's natural to have an objection to that. You had no reason to expect that, and good land use policy traditionally separates those industrial uses in an industrial zone, not in residential or ag residential districts. So I understand that tension. The good news is, I think if we adopt some zoning principles based around the concept of consent and compensation and write that into law, the board won't ever have to think about this again. And whether a project ever goes forward or doesn't go forward will strictly be determined by whether or not the wind company is able to buy an easement from every neighboring property owner that they consent to in exchange for financial compensation that they negotiate on their own. And if they can lease up enough of the county that everybody that's gonna bear the direct impacts has signed off on it, I think they should be able to build. If they can't lease those people up, I don't think a zoning board should give them an easement across the entire county just because they don't feel like buying those easements. Now that may shock you a little bit. I think the more I talk about it, you'll understand exactly what I'm saying. I'm not offering them a blank check. I'm saying what's been done historically is fundamentally wrong and flies in the face of good land use principles. Here's the bad news. Your county government in the past sometime has enacted wind energy zoning regulations that ignore sound land use policy and sound science. This is not how it should be. And in fact, my reading of the ordinance shows a number of things that are obsolete or in fact so permissive I've never seen them written in any other ordinance anywhere. And here's a copy of the section that was given to me. I'm presuming that this is in fact the ordinance that's in effect today. I trust the people that gave it to me. If somehow I made a mistake, it's unintentional. But it says 500-foot or shorter wind turbines have to be 1,000 feet from an occupied structure on an adjoining property. And this is the part that's really frustrating. 1.1 times total tower height or more from occupied structure on subject property. So if you're a leaseholder and you have a 500-foot tall turbine, you could put it 550 feet from your house. I don't know any wind developer that would do that, first of all. It's a ridiculously permissive regulation. I think it was a mistake because where we see 1.1 times the height most often is a setback to a road, not a house. And I think that's not far enough from a road either. But I've never seen any language this permissive. And then they made it 1,500 feet from an occupied structure on an adjoining property if it's 600 feet or less. And again, only 1.1 times the height from the occupied structure for the leaseholder's house. The bottom line is, and then it's silent on noise, except it defaults to the Illinois Pollution Control Board standards. Most wind ordinances have a whole section on noise. Here they defaulted to the Illinois Pollution Control Board. The ordinance really needs to be updated. There's a lot of things that are not covered in here, and I think your county remains at risk if you don't take some steps to put more modern language in this thing. So that's kind of a baseline, so you understand where we're starting from before I get into this other stuff. So all that being said, I would love now to just talk zoning with you, right? I just want to talk about good land use policy because that's kind of what I do. But since the wind industry only talks about schools and money and leaseholder payments and tax revenue, et cetera, if we don't have answers to their claims, then you're going to have a hard time responding to those claims when they're presented. So unfortunately, I have to spend a few minutes talking about some of their claims with respect to the value of energy, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to go through a few of those things because if you haven't heard them already, you will. This presentation was designed mainly for communities with not a lot of experience with wind energy, but it's my understanding you have several hundred turbines in place already in this county. So you have experience that I didn't have in 2009 when I first started working on wind zone. We had to drive 3 hours to see wind turbines because there were only about 100 operating in the entire state at that time. Things have changed a lot since 2009. So the first thing we learned in Michigan, looking at the National Renewable Energy Lab wind maps, is basically purple areas have very strong wind, and yellow and orange areas have pretty moderate to weak wind. And that has a dramatic effect on the price of the wind energy generated. So you see Iowa there has a lot of really dark purple, 8.5 meter per second wind at 80 meters. Michigan's best wind is Iowa's worst. And why that matters is you can buy wind energy out of Iowa right now for around $20 a megawatt hour. Michigan's cheapest wind energy is just under $50 a megawatt hour. So we're paying 2.5 times the price for Michigan wind versus what we get imported from Iowa for. And guess what? Illinois is not a lot better. Your wind is not great compared to the really windy states like Oklahoma and Minnesota and Iowa. So it means your homegrown wind puts you in an economic disadvantage just like it does us in Michigan. But the wind guys don't tell you that. If Iberdrola was here to give you low-cost energy, they would say, we're not going to build here, we're going to build them in Iowa and import the energy into your state. It'll be much cheaper for you. And we'll reduce more CO2 with each turbine built. And historically, these are the power purchase agreement prices, the contract prices for wind energy. The purple line that I've superimposed over the purple circles show the historic cost price for wind energy out west, out way right in the middle of the prairies. The yellow bubbles that are harder to see are the Midwestern area where we are, Illinois. This trend line, you see they're always higher than the purple ones, and it's because of wind resource. The red line I put in, because that's Michigan's wind contracts, and you can see ours is really expensive. You see our line jumps way up at the end. One of our most recent wind projects is the most expensive wind energy contract signed anywhere in the United States in 2016. You know, and yet the developers are talking about how it's saving you all money. It's preposterous. So the next thing that comes up a lot, and we hear this a lot, is what about CO2? Aren't we really doing this to save the planet? Well, my group is officially agnostic on the impacts of CO2. Some of us are very concerned about it, and some of us aren't convinced that human beings have that big a role in it. I'm not going to argue it. But I will tell you this much, the Obama administration, which is very concerned about CO2 and global warming, added up the economic harm from emitting 1 ton of CO2. And so in other words, sea level rise and more dramatic weather events and all those things, what's that cost our economy? And they said the price on that is $40 per ton of CO2 emitted. That's a lot. The price of electricity in the wholesale market is less than that. So they're basically saying, whatever you're paying for coal-fired electricity, you need to double that because of the economic harm that's not showing up on the price. You say, okay, well, let's reduce that by building wind energy. How much is that going to cost per ton of CO2 avoided? Well, MISO, the grid operator, are you guys in the Ameren district? Is that your utility here? So you guys are probably in MISO rather than PJM. A little north of here it goes into PJM. MISO operates more wind than any other RTO in the United States, as far as I know. It's one of the biggest. Anyways, they did some calculations on what wind in MISO is costing to reduce 1 ton of CO2. And MISO concluded that it's $237 a ton to reduce CO2, which harm is only valued at 40. So you're paying creating 6 times the economic harm for a harm that's only valued at 40 in the first place. So it's a very expensive way to reduce CO2. If you want to reduce CO2 cheaply, you replace coal with natural gas. It's by far the cheapest way to reduce CO2 emissions. Okay, why don't I talk about the benefits of wind development? I get this criticism a lot, so I started to add a couple slides about this. There are benefits for this project here, no question. But the fossil fuel utilities like Iberdrola and Avangrid, who harvest the tax credits, are going to make them, by far, the lion's share of the profits. In Michigan, in a regulated environment, our Detroit Edison utility makes, over 20 years, between the PTC and regulated profits, a 100 megawatt project, about $200 million. That's how much they'll make, while they'll kick back to your community $500,000 a year. So they're giving you just crumbs from the table. The second benefit is local lease payments and some increased tax revenue. No question, I mean, some money's gonna come in, but you have to put that money into a larger context. Wind developers speak of these promises of great financial benefit to landowners and township or county coffers as an inducement for permissive wind energy zoning, even though tax revenue is not a criteria you're supposed to use when considering a zoning request. But not only are these revenue factors irrelevant, all of the money promised to your community in the form of these new taxes and landowner lease payments are recovered from ratepayers, employers who have to pay higher energy costs, and the U.S. Treasury. There is no free lunch. Iberdrola is not importing a sack of money from Spain to sprinkle into your community. All this money is coming from you, and only a tiny bit of it is coming back. In other words, this cartoon sums it up pretty neatly. The man is saying, look, he's giving us all money just like he promised, and the wife points out, he has your wallet. And that's where it's coming from. So how about wind for saving the family farm? We're all sensitive to this. It's a difficult farming year. About half our crop ground remained unplanted in our townships. I understand that, and now they can't get in the field to combine it because we've had 7 inches of rain in the last whatever. Sounds like you guys are wet here and got more rain coming. But are we saving the family farm in Illinois? Well, there's 72,000 farms in Illinois. We got about 4,500 megawatts of wind in operation. I'm going to guess that that's about 2,300 turbines. There are probably only 1,000 farms or less, because most farms are signing leases for 2 to 4 turbines, but let's assume on average each farm gets 2 turbines. There's maybe 2,300 farms, maybe 1,000 farms hosting those 2,300 turbines. That means only 1% of Illinois farmers are going to be saved to the degree that a wind contract might actually save the farm. 99% are going to pay for those people's income through higher utility rates. And we're seeing now open and honest statements in the paper that we're raising our rates 17%, 20%. Why? Because of wind. Because of wind. They're finally, for years they tried to hide it, now they're just saying, wind energy costs money, we have to have a rate increase. So you're basically, you sign a wind lease, you've agreed to tax all your other farmer friends who don't get a turbine, and you put the money in your pocket. That's really how it works. So now I'm going to jump into Michigan's experience, mainly because that's where I started from, but it's my point of reference. But the state made some recommended zoning regulations back in 2007. 1,000-foot setbacks from homes and a 55 decibel noise limit. It wasn't a binding recommendation. The state didn't have the power to dictate. In Michigan, we have township level zoning if you want it. Each 6x6 township can set their own land use policy, and that preempts county zoning. Turbines were only 390 feet tall in 2007, by the way. But the wind guys will come in and say, this is the state guidelines, you have to use them. And it turns out that was never true. Well, we got a lot of wind in Michigan, about a third of what you have. We got a lot more than Ohio. But experience has been a very harsh teacher. We've had a lot of litigation, a lot of protests, a lot of recalls, a lot of referenda. It's been highly, highly controversial. I live right here. And by the way, it was Illinois' own Exelon that was in hassling us in the southern end of my state. And you guys have had a lot of political unrest about this stuff as well. Boone County, Livingston County, there's a lot of heartache involved with this stuff. I want to point out too to you, because I heard the question about the Native American tribes and the birds, wildlife impacts. So right here, the purple star is a project called Garden Wind. Any of you watch The Curse of Oak Island reality TV show? Have you ever seen that? Where Marty Lagina's digging for the pirate treasure out in some island in Newfoundland or something. Marty's from Michigan. He owns Heritage Sustainable. And when he proposed the Garden Wind project, which by the way is one of the most expensive wind contracts ever signed in the United States, well over $100 a megawatt hour, after getting a 30% subsidy, cash grant up front through the Obama stimulus package, it still was that expensive. U.S. Fish and Wildlife said, don't build on the Garden Peninsula. It's a stunning peninsula in Lake Michigan. It's got limestone cliffs. It's got a fantastic state park called Fayette State Park. It's an old iron smelting village. It's well restored. It's gorgeous, but you got to drive past its first 14 turbines to get there. Fish and Wildlife said, don't build there. It's a migratory bird pathway. In fact, we don't want any turbines within 3 miles of the Great Lakes shoreline. They told him twice not to do it, and he did it anyways, because they don't have any authority to stop you. So don't fall into the trap in believing that wind developers are environmentalists. They are not. They're large corporations trying to increase shareholder value. That's their obligation. What about the second one with the purple square around it? That just happened last year. RES Americas, which is a United Kingdom company, leased a huge tract of land from Weyerhaeuser Lumber. They owned all the ground, which is a little different. Because usually here you lease a lot of farmers, and then the farmers come to the county meetings and say, we all want this, this is good for us. In the Upper Peninsula, it was just Weyerhaeuser Lumber. There was only one leaseholder. They're already rich, and they didn't get a lot of sympathy from the local communities, right? You're not going to save the family lumber business when you're an empire across the United States. They were going to build 2 turbines on top of Mount Arvon and Mount Kerwood, the 2 highest points in the state of Michigan, where hikers go all the time. Not near, not in the area, right on top. And the Keweenaw Indian tribe also had hunting rights on this ground. The people did stop the project through local zoning and through a referendum. But the tribes came out strongly in opposition to this project as well. In fact, most of the opposition to this project was led by what we would normally call progressive or liberal environmentalists. A lot of times we're accused of being right-wing conservatives, what have you, but here it was all people with a strong environmental background out of Marquette who were very concerned about the environmental impact. Keweenaw Bay is gorgeous, and you don't go to Keweenaw Bay at night to look across and see 46 or 38 flashing red lights, which, as you know, you can sometimes see for 30 or 40 miles depending on the topography. By the way, if you want to protect your wildlife, you have to put it in your ordinance. No other entity is going to do that, but your county can absolutely regulate to protect wildlife and native features in this county. We learned a couple other things. I'll flip through these because I don't want to just talk all night, even though I've done that before. We've learned wind is very land use intensive. So this is our Fermi 2 nuclear power plant. It's 1,100 megawatts. It sits about a 1 square mile patch. Actually, one of my friends works there. 1,100 megawatts of emissions-free energy. I'm not saying whether you need to be pro or anti-nuclear, but I'm telling you, you produce an awful lot of power on 1 square mile. Let's say you hate nuclear and you want to replace it with wind energy. Can you? Well, sort of. You could build 2 V100 turbines in every square mile from Toledo to Detroit to Ann Arbor. Solid. So no matter, that's like 60 miles across there. All you would see is wind turbines in every direction. But still, in August, in July, when the wind often doesn't blow, and you may have observed that here too, right, during the heat waves, the turbines in this county often aren't spinning. You still got to build almost 1,100 megawatts of gas-fired generation to keep the lights on when those turbines aren't spinning. If you're a regulated utility and you make your money by capital expenditure, by building power plants, you love wind because it means you now have to build 2 power plants and get paid twice when before 1 plant would have been enough. So the utilities love this. They force you to push 2 shopping carts down the aisle, one with a gas plant and one with wind turbines, when they could have just built the gas or preserved the existing generation. And by the way, there's no known way to replace a nuclear power plant without your emissions going up, period. Your emissions will always rise when you shut down a baseload nuclear power plant because the wind and sun aren't there all the time and the gas will always be filled in by fossil fuel generation. United States CO2 has dropped because we're switching from coal to gas. Germany's emissions have stayed flat to risen because they're trying to shut down nukes and replace it with wind, which has caused them to ramp up more coal. Put another way, you can have 1 township worth of wind turbines here, 36 square miles. Gee, they sure are big. They sure like they make a lot of electricity because they're so big. Well, it turns out the amount of electricity, the potential electricity from a township full of wind turbines can be replicated by a semi-trailer mounted gas turbine that you can hide inside your average dairy barn. So they cover an awful lot of ground to make a very small amount of electricity. And they only last about 20 years, and we see some of them being repowered at 10 or 11 because the production tax credit expires after the first 10 years, and if they repower them, they get a new shot at the production tax credit, even though there's many years of serviceable life left in the parts. All right, now back into the zoning. Let me give you a couple general thoughts. And this is something zoning people often don't understand. But I read this in my zoning training book many years ago, and it stuck with me. So this is from Michigan State's zoning book, but it comes from a book in Kentucky. So both Kentucky and Michigan are looking at these things similarly, and Illinois' LaSalle standards, which is something that zoning lawyers understand a great deal about, they recognize these same criteria as well. So this is so neat the way they say this. They said, beware of these zoning excuses. Sad but true, far too many hearings on rezoning cases resemble a horse trading affair being carried out in a comic soap opera fashion. Some of the more ridiculous excuses offered for granting rezoning follow such lines as, you can't keep a man from using his land. Well, guess what? If you're a planning commissioner and you believe you can't tell somebody what to do on their private property, then you just disqualified yourself from being a planning commissioner, because whether you like it or not, the only thing a planning commissioner does is decide how other people are going to be allowed to use their private property, because if you're not telling them what they can do with their private property, you don't have zoning. So throw out your zoning if you don't like that, but you can't say I'm a planning commissioner who will never tell anybody what they can do on their own private property. Secondly, I will say, people always say, I will do whatever I want on my ground, and you can't stop me. I say, well, then would you mind me putting an adult bookstore next to your daughter's daycare? Well, no, we can't allow that. Right, so nobody really believes that, right? We believe there have to be certain reasonable restrictions. So here's another pathetic zoning excuse. This will bring in more revenue. So hear what they're saying? Revenue street is not a valid zoning consideration. And if you think about it, why should it be? If you're gonna build a mobile home on a piece of property in a rural township, how much taxes are you gonna send to the community compared to a guy building a power plant? Almost nothing. So if you consider the tax revenue, you're by definition saying, if you promise a lot of money, we'll give you much more permission under the law, and if you promise us very little, you won't get many permissions under the law. Well, that's not equal standing in the face of the law anymore. That's auction zoning available to the highest bidder, and that's not how we're supposed to look at this. How about this one? I'm sure you've heard it here. They're too big of an outfit. We can't deny them the rezoning. Wind Company sued a number of townships in the state of Michigan. Tiny townships, 1,000, 1,200 people. You know how many times the Wind Company has won so far? That would be zero. That would be zero. Your county zoning law is very, very strong. How about this one? He invested a lot of money in this land, and these proposals thinking the rezoning, thinking the zoning would be granted. How can we deny it? Not our problem. In Michigan, they sign wind leases in townships whose zoning presently makes utility scale wind illegal. Yet they promise that they're gonna build illegal structures on this ground to all the leaseholding farmers, and then have them come in and demand a rezoning, because we have a right. Well, no, for 40 years, our ordinance said nothing taller than 60 feet. You never complained until somebody offered you a lot of money for 500 feet. And now you're saying you have a right for taller structures? No, why did anybody ever offer you money to build illegal structures in the first place? It was already clear in the law, but they do it all the time. Oh, like his attorney says, probably unconstitutional, we don't know for sure. I hear that a lot. And we don't want to have to go to court. After all, does it really look that bad? Those are really bogus zoning excuses. And in Ohio, and in Illinois, you have what's called the LaSalle standards, and I encourage you to look these up. Under Illinois case law, there are a series of tests or criteria that should be applied to zoning amendments or approvals that are called the LaSalle standards. It must be noted that although wind developers speak incessantly about tax revenue and money coming into the community, financial matters are not explicitly identified as valid considerations in the LaSalle standards. The most telling example I ever saw of this was in Ford County last year, and the wind companies, 3 of them, brought in Dr. Loomis from Illinois State. I don't know if you've seen Dr. Loomis here, but he travels the circuit in Illinois talking about the economic benefits. He stood up and sat down to start to give his testimony, and the attorney for the folks interrupted in the middle of in the first 4 sentences out of his mouth and said, "Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt the proceedings, but everything Dr. Loomis is about to tell you is irrelevant and not to be considered under the LaSalle standards under Illinois law." And Loomis tried to continue for 1 or 2 more sentences and finally just shrugged and walked off the platform. Yet, they will come and tell you to think about the money all the time. Yet under Illinois law, it's not one of the main criteria you're even supposed to be using to evaluate zoning approvals or amendments. All right, now I'm gonna get back to zoning proper, and I will speed things up. How do we evaluate any product that is brought before us? If you're gonna go buy a new tractor or car, you wanna look at the total cost of ownership. So what are the pluses, what are the minuses? I think these folks here who are living next to turbines are gonna tell you their experience with some of the minuses. The wind companies will tell you all the pluses, so you don't need me to articulate those for you. So if you're gonna go buy a car, it's pretty easy because we're all pretty familiar with cars and we've had a lot of experience with them. But my wind company came and said we're gonna build a bunch of 100-meter class Vestas V100 turbines. And I was like, well, I don't know what that means. In fact, I asked him how tall they were, and he said, well, they're 100 meters. Well, that's only to the hub. He didn't tell us about the next 150 feet to the tip of the rotor. So it was very deceptive. Claimed they didn't know how tall they were in feet, even though they'd already told the FAA they're 494 feet tall. And these are the kinds of things that I observed firsthand that made me say, wait a minute, these guys are playing pretty fast and loose here. So we had to figure that out. Well, in Michigan, one of the big tall structures that everybody recognizes is the Mackinac Bridge that goes from the lower peninsula to the upper peninsula. And when we found out that these things are nearly as tall as the towers on the Mackinac Bridge, and most of us are scared to drive across the deck that's only 200 feet above the water, we got a sense of the scale. Now, it's my understanding the turbines here are proposed for maybe 600 feet, which would be 50 feet taller than these towers. I don't know how old the turbines are here, but some of the ones I saw driving in on 80, I know were only 390 feet tall. But what really matters is this is my friend's home in Ludington, Michigan, on Lake Michigan. This is what a V100 looks like at 1,139 feet from your house. That's my friend Kerry Schnelldecker's house and his wife, or it was. They abandoned it at about a 35% hit in property values. When the turbines went into operation, they moved into their basement to start sleeping at night because too loud. They ultimately sued the wind company along with 17 of their neighbors, I think, won some kind of settlement that he's not free to disclose. His kids wanted to come home. They'd both gone away to college, and they came back for Thanksgiving break, and after being gone for several months, and they said, wow, Mom and Dad, we've forgotten how bad it is. It's hard for us to come home because of the noise. Now, can I tell you that everybody experiences that? I can't tell you that. But I can tell you that there's enough people that experience it that I don't think it should be happening, and proper setbacks would have corrected this. So was this guy just some local crank then, and who was complaining about everything, and what happened to him afterwards? Well, what happened to him afterwards is Mason County, Michigan amended their wind zoning because they didn't want this to happen to anybody ever again, and nobody can build wind turbines in Mason County anymore. Oh, and by the way, Kerry Schindeldecker was appointed to the County Planning Commission and is also on their Zoning Board of Appeals. Even after suing the county, they found him so credible, they gave him positions in the county board. He happens to be a good friend of mine. He has to be one of the finest people I know. He's a sharp engineer. So, Illinois County, you have full authority under Illinois law to regulate wind. You can establish standards for wind farms and electric generating wind devices. The standards may include, without limitation, the height and the number of devices that may be located in a geographic area. So you have turbines here only because your county government has let them be here, and if they wanted to draw a circle around the area and say, don't put them here or nothing taller than 100 feet, they certainly have full authority to do that. No question, it's up to them. They have the power. And the standards for zoning here are the same as in most jurisdictions. Your guidelines are you have to promote public health, safety, morals, comfort, and general welfare, conserving the values of property throughout the county. Those are your standards. You have more of them than Michigan. In Michigan, we basically sum that up by saying health, safety, and welfare. So I'm not going to repeat all these. I'm going to substitute health, safety, and welfare in the next set of slides because they convey largely the same thoughts. But the bottom line is your zoning authority needs to recognize if the proposed land use cannot be performed in keeping with health, safety, and welfare, it should not be permitted. Wind developers' primary commitment is to their bottom line, and their recommendations, and this is any kind of developer, I don't care if you're a housing project or a factory, their recommendations to your board is designed to maximize their return on investment. But planning commissioners and the county board alone are the ones who raise their hand and swore an oath to protect your health, safety, and welfare. And it's something they should take very seriously. I have no reason to believe they don't here, but I think there's a lot of education that can be done to help improve the process. So how far can you go in zoning? Well, your Illinois law is already pretty clear on wind. You can do whatever you want, but you can't. You have to have a rational relationship to protecting health, safety, and welfare for your zoning regulation. It can't be arbitrary or capricious. You can't say Methodists can have purple houses only and Catholics have to paint all their houses black. I mean, that's arbitrary, capricious, and a gross violation of civil rights laws. Bottom line is, though, reasonable zoning is strong in the court of law. You have very little to fear if you can articulate a rational reason for writing the regulation you wrote. I'm going to skip over a few things, so just one thing. So, are developers' profits more important than health, safety, and welfare? Promised increase in tax revenue, private property rights, green jobs, or emissions reduction? Are any of those things more important than health, safety, and welfare? Obviously not. Obviously not. But we want to trade those off all the time, and I see it happen all the time. Well, we really like that money because I don't really want to raise taxes in the county. And if we put turbines in 3 townships and the other 25 get the money, we've only taxed 3 and got all this extra revenue. I think that's a lazy approach to generating the revenue you want. If everybody needs new roads, then tax everybody equally instead of sticking turbines in 2 or 3 townships, basically just taxing them so everybody else can benefit. All right, I'm only going to briefly go over height, setbacks, noise, and property values. And again, we have very permissive regulations here in Henry County. We regularly restrict structures on height. Homes are often restricted to 2 stories or sometimes 3. And it's not because a 4 or 5 story building is unsafe, it's because you didn't want to see houses that tall. Likewise, there'll be exemptions for leg elevators and stuff, but a lot of times 60 foot is the height limit for church steeples and things like that. Bottom line is, Illinois law has already said, you can regulate them on height. We regulate billboards on appearance, and the reason I'm talking about this, wind companies will come in and say, you have to prove to me that wind turbines make people sick, and if you can't prove wind turbine syndrome is real, you don't have a right to regulate my land use. But there's nothing in Illinois law that says you have to prove anything to the developer's satisfaction before you adopt your regulation. You didn't have to prove to the billboard company that billboard's bigger than whatever your limit is. make people sick. You simply had to say, how big of a billboard do you want to see? And then you set the number. And you can do that with wind turbines. They're not a special land use class. And our wind company in Michigan said, look, there are some, so this is a wind guy, Detroit Edison. There are some pristine places in Michigan where you don't want to impact the view shed. You take a situation like Leelanau County or the old Mission Peninsula here in our region, like in his backyard. Certainly there are areas where it just would make perfect economic sense. We probably don't want them as a region here. He's basically saying where we live is so beautiful, even though the wind is good, we would never want a wind turbine here. But how about Huron County? They obviously built turbines there. Their conclusion is not beautiful enough. Well, guess what? The people in Huron County want their community to be beautiful, and their definition may very well be different than the people in the Leelanau Peninsula. So how tall is too tall for wind turbines? I think this picture is actually in Illinois, and I know this one is. These are 390s. This is down by Bloomington. I took it in about 2012. It's up to you. How tall do you want them? Set a limit. The Illinois law says you can. How about setbacks? I don't want to dig into this too deeply, but they always tell you there's an industry standard setback out there, but it varies. They will tell you that, like, we had two developers at once in my township, so I saw this firsthand. The first guy says 1,000 feet and 55 decibels, that's the industry standard. The next guy stood up for the other company and said, no, 45 decibels and 1320 is the industry standard. Well, gee, you guys should get on the same page. What's up with this? Well, one of the sources I've looked at shows the so-called industry standards is around the world. France, a mile. Germany, a mile. Manitoba, 6,500 feet. Illinois gets a mention here at 1,500 feet, but I don't know of any universal standard for that, but yet that's one here. And then they pick out Michigan right there at the bottom of the list with 1,000. Well, these are just guidelines that were published in various areas, but this idea that there's an industry standard is nonsense. Whatever they tell you will be the industry standard. What if we go to the owner's manuals for the turbine companies themselves, their safety and operation manuals? Well, Vestas, who's the biggest turbine manufacturer in the world, says, look, if a runaway operation should occur, the plant must be evacuated by running upwind, and access to the surrounding area of about 1,640 feet must be restricted. Now, your ordinance permits turbines 1.1 times the height next to a house, but yet Vestas is saying if the thing takes off and the brakes fail, you have to run away 1,640 feet. Well, I don't live in an evacuation zone right now. Why should I be placed in one because my neighbor signs a lease? Nordex says the same thing. In case of a fire in the nacelle or on the rotor, parts may fall off. Watch the internet, they're falling a lot. In case of a fire, nobody's permitted with a radius of 1,640 feet. So here's one in Illinois, a 390 footer that had a rotor failure, and the debris field was measured about 1,500 feet. Well, what do you know? That's based on pretty good science, their 1,640 number. I don't know what that number is now for 600 or 700 footers, because they won't let the safety manuals out anymore. They call them proprietary trade secrets. Huron County has one for Vestas turbines, and when you FOIA it, they say, we can't let you have it. We had to sign a confidentiality agreement to look at the safety manual. And if you want it, you'll have to sue us. And here's a sense of scale. Of course, you may already know, but there's a guy standing on one of the failed rotor blades at a more recent project. There's a recent paper from a journal called Wind Energy. I try to use sources that are very friendly to the wind industry, so I'm not accused of just dredging up negative stuff. So here's published in a peer-reviewed journal called Wind Energy, and they did an analysis of throw distances of detached objects from horizontal axis wind turbines, the ones we've been looking at. They said that in normal operating conditions, pieces of blade in the range of 7 to 16 tons would be thrown out less than 2,300 feet for the entire range of wind turbines. But at the extreme tip speed in an overspeed event, they could throw a blade up to 1.2 miles from the turbine. For the ice throw cases, maximum distances of 100 to 600 meters, or 328 to 2,000 feet, are obtained for standstill, so 328 feet if it's not turning at all, up to 2,000 feet in normal operating conditions. And then it says these simulations can be useful revision of wind turbine setback standards. So what's my source? The Wind Energy Journal. And what's the purpose of this article? To help instruct you for setback guidelines. And it's not theoretical. In 2018, a piece of ice damaged a skylight at a community college flung from a blade. I also read an article about a semi having a windshield smashed on the turnpike where ice flung off and hit it in the windshield. So it's happening. Nonetheless, they will tell you 1,000 to 1,400 feet from homes, not property lines, is acceptable. And here's the rub. It's a phrase I coined. It's called trespass zoning. When you demand that the setback distances for wind turbines be measured from the home and adjacent properties rather than from the property line, which we do with all other regulations, the wind developer is essentially asking the regulatory body to grant them an easement or trespass privileges on unleased properties. We call this trespass zoning. I won't dig into this too deeply, but here's a quick picture. If you use a standard 1,320-foot setback, and this is not to scale, to the home, you'll see that their evacuation zone still is 320 feet past your house, right? And I've often wondered, if the thing fails, do the employees at least have to knock on your door and say, hey, it's failing, as they run across your yard to get away? They've never made that clear. You say, well, if we move the evacuation zone back to the corner of your house, here's the next problem. Farmer A over here, if he wants to build a house for his daughter in that semicircle, he really can't anymore, certainly not safely, because you're inside the evacuation zone. So, by this guy signing a lease with a tenant who's putting a turbine this close, they've actually just extracted an easement, a safety and nuisance easement across that neighboring property. But that guy had no right to negotiate that easement or negotiate a fair price for his loss of amenity. Zoning shouldn't work that way. At bare minimum, for 500-foot class turbines, I think you gotta be 1640 from an unleased property line. And it's not theoretical. Here's a wind map from Exelon, Illinois' Exelon. This is a project in Bridgehampton Township that was canceled. Green is leased, gray is unleased. Notice the little house lots are unleased. That's often the case. And in fact, the guy on the left there doesn't live on the parcel. Sometimes they live in the next county. Of course you lease your farm if you don't live there, right? Collect the money, you don't have to live next to him. Zoom in a little bit. Look at this guy's farm in the middle here. The circles take maybe half of his property. Half of his property has been rendered certainly diminished, or if not outright unsuitable for future development. That doesn't seem fair to me, but yet that's what they demand everywhere. You say, what about my rights to do what I want with my property? Well, the right to swing my fist ends where the other man's nose begins. My corollary is if my development project requires me to punch you in the nose, I should first get your consent and then at least compensate you for your broken nose. The express goal of zoning regulations is to separate conflicting land uses from each other by establishing setbacks and noise limits for neighboring homes rather than property lines. The conflicting use is actually granted legal access to the neighboring property without consent or compensation. This is fundamentally unjust. So what's the right setback distance? Well, at bare minimum 1640 to a property line if you're just regulating for rotor failure. But if you look at the other data I showed, much bigger setbacks are probably in order now. And if you're using distance instead of noise, so in other words, the farther away you get, the quieter it is next to the house, you may want to go out as far as a mile or a mile and a quarter, because that's about the distance it takes to get them far away enough that most people aren't going to be hassled by the noise. Because of time, I'm not going to dig into any more details here on these next few slides, except to say, if you want to see a very expanded version of this talk, just search for my name on YouTube, Kevin Martis, Branch County, and that's like a 2-hour talk with the Q&A at the end. And you can see all these things in great detail. But my number one point is equitable wind energy zoning should not forcibly donate unleased property to the neighboring landowner's tenants. I don't know where we do that for any other land use, and that's why I still stand and speak on this stuff. And I won't talk into the waivers, but I do quickly want to hit on noise and property values, and then I will stop. So how loud is too loud, and who do you believe? Well, remember that Heritage Wind project in the Garden Peninsula? 14 turbines had 73 people signing a petition saying stop the noise. And they're all between 12 and 1,400 feet from the turbines. And they give you these charts about how loud and noisy it is. It's no different than normal speech or a refrigerator. But most of us, when we step outside at night, hear something more like rustling leaves or a whisper, 20 to 30 decibels. 55 is far louder than what you're hearing out there. World Health Organization makes it clear, and I'll just sum these up, that you want to keep the noise level below 40 decibels outside your house at night. Below 40. And they reaffirmed that in 2018. The WHO has new guidelines for wind turbine noise in Europe, and they make this clearly. Here it is, wind turbine noise. For average noise exposure, we conditionally recommend reducing noise levels produced by wind turbines below 45 decibels LDEN. Now you're saying, why did I just say 40 and this says 45? Well, it turns out this little LDEN at the end means day, evening, night, and there's a penalty for each of those segments of time where it gets quieter and quieter. If you adjust that LDEN number to the more common LEQ, it's just under 40 decibels. That's the right level. There's no question that's the right level. The wind companies don't like it because it takes 2,000 to 4,000 feet to hit that level. And because Thomas Jefferson gridded out the Northwest Territory in 1 mile squares, and we built roads on almost every mile, it's hard for them to get those setbacks here. But like I say, just because your business model requires you to stick a size 13 shoe and foot into a size 9 shoe isn't our problem. I really don't want to explore this too deeply, but you're blessed in Illinois that the author of the Illinois Pollution Control Board standards, Dr. Paul Schomer, is one of the most respected acousticians in the United States. He's quite elderly now. I've testified with him in North Dakota and in Illinois. And he makes it clear that, first of all, the Pollution Control Board standards were modified between 1990 and 2000 in a way that he doesn't recommend. But his recommendation, again, is 39 decibels or lower. He authored your standards that they have to abide by now, but he did not approve of the changes. His new consensus is below 39. Dave Hessler works for wind companies, wrote this paper for the Department of International Association of Regulated Utilities, NARUC, and the state of Minnesota. He concludes below 40. Ontario Ministry of Environment, below 40, which NextEra says is consistent with the US EPA, and they're right. Again, 40 decibels is the correct number. Finally, property values. If they've been here talking to you about property values, this is the only paper they bring around. They brought it to my township, say Lawrence Berkeley National Lab says no loss of property values, period. Well, the author says, I think one of the things that often happens is the wind developers put our report forward and say, look, property values aren't affected, but that's not what we would say specifically. On the other hand, they have little ground to stand on if they say we won't guarantee that. If they say wind turbines don't harm property values, then the right answer is, well, you'd have no problem offering a property value guarantee, right? Your own study says you're not at any risk. The truth is, they have 3 studies they've used in the past suggesting little impact on property values. There's many, many studies showing substantial loss to property values. One of the more recent ones from the well-respected London School of Economics makes it clear there's a substantial loss of property values with proximity to wind turbines. But the only one they want to talk about is Ben Holmes' study. Mike McCann, the appraiser from Chicago, Illinois, he studied Adams County, 25 to 40%. Unfortunately, Mike passed away last year from brain cancer. He was another good friend of mine. Property value impacts are real. And unfortunately, I have to skip through all this because we just don't have time. So, most land use changes are pretty benign. I've seen people argue about how big a sign should you be allowed to have in front of a church, for instance. Well, if it's 20 or 25 feet, you can argue there's some difference, but it doesn't make that drastic of a difference. Wind turbines make a massive impact on the community because of their sheer scale and number. We felt in our township, and I continue to recommend since 2011, that if you're going to make such huge changes in your landscape, you should only do so with consent and compensation from all the people who are going to have to live with this noxious land use. That's the bottom line. You shouldn't force it upon them without a say. And the way to do that, I have to say this once, 2-stage setbacks, what we did in Riga. If you signed a wind lease, you could have them 1,000 feet from your house. If you didn't sign a wind lease, the setback had to be 4 times the height of the turbine from your property line. But if you signed a good neighbor agreement with them, it would come back down to the 1,000 feet or the 1,320. That gives each individual landowner the right to negotiate on an equal footing with the large landowners what the appropriate compensation is for their loss of amenity of home, or whether they want to sign one at all. If you put that kind of regulation in place, your county board will never be pressured again. And if they want to build here, they'll just have to negotiate enough good neighbor agreements so that they can move forward. So far, they've never agreed to do that. But I think it's the only reasonable way to do this. If we have to do this to save the planet, then a small subset of the population shouldn't bear the bulk of the price for saving the planet. We should spread the cost out across all ratepayers, and I've told the wind developers a lot of times, you want me to go away, offer to buy every house out that's inside the 40 decibel noise contour at fair market value, and my objection goes away. But you gotta offer to buy them out. You shouldn't force them out through your behavior. And finally, nobody ever has come to your planning commission and said, the light coming through my windows is too steady, could you make it flicker? Nobody's ever said the nighttime noise level is too quiet, could you raise it to 55 decibels from 25? Nobody's ever said my property values are too stable, could you build some 50-story industrial machines next door to put that value at risk? Bottom line is, we were here first, we get to decide, and that's all I have for you.
It'll take Ken and Kat just a minute to set up. So you got any quick questions for Kevin before we start with our next presenters?
Yes,
Holy
sir.
mackerel, Phil.
Yeah. First of all, I want to qualify, I am a landowner and I'm under contract
Okay.
with Avangrid. You lost me right there at the beginning when you said that Avangrid was trying to smear you. There hasn't been anything that I'm aware of in this area where Avangrid has tried to smear your name.
I didn't
or
say they have.
smeared anyone.
I said you can expect it.
The negatives have kind of come from the stock group. Anyway, what is the paradigm for generating power in the United States now?
The paradigm?
Yes.
What do you mean by paradigm?
Well, it used to be coal, oil, and nuclear.
Right?
That is changing and changing rather quickly to solar, wind, and gas.
That's right, but it's always with gas, that's correct. Which is why.
And
BP
gas, I
wants to
agree
do
with you, gas is a good idea.
it, Right?
But the problem is, when our Native American friends were here, they were totally against any pipelines being built. We can't get pipelines into Illinois to generate electricity if people are against those also. Now, you also said that western Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, wonderful wind out there.
Yep.
But what's the problem with that?
Well, you know, transmission.
Transmission,
That's
exactly.
right.
That's why we don't build power plants in Montana where the coal is, because we can't transport the electricity back to Illinois.
Actually, there's a huge coal-fired power plant called Colstrip, and that is generated and goes all the way back to California. So it does happen.
Yeah, there are 4 coal plants shutting down in this state.
Yes.
In the next 12 months.
Right. So is there a question here?
I listened to what you had to say,
Sure.
and we do have a lot of nuclear plants in this state.
That's right.
Every one of them is leaking tritium into groundwater. And I think about the Fukushima plant that's still leaking nuclear water into the ocean, and nobody wants to talk about that. No one wants to go. Now, you said something else about tax values, you said something about, first of all, Burns Township isn't an urban area, it's a farm community. But you said something about putting a mobile home out there. In truth, in Henry County, if you put a mobile home and leave the axles under it, you pay no property taxes at all.
Which was my point. So, I mean, are you gonna try and rebut every one of my points, or do you have some questions?
Yes, I am, because
Well, I don't think there's time for that, but if you have a question, I would answer it. But I will say that your number one concern about what's our energy mix gonna be like, and what are we gonna do about generating all this power if people are opposed to pipelines, opposed to everything. Bottom line is, you build a lot of wind, you're gonna have to build gas, and you're gonna have to solve the pipeline problem. There's no two ways about that. I'm not here to solve that. I'm just here to point out that fossil fuel companies like BP are doing very, very well with wind because it forces fuel switching from coal to gas. And that's the thing that I want to expose. And secondly, if you care about CO2 and climate change, you better do everything you can to save your nuclear power plants, because it's the only way to halt ever-increasing amounts of CO2. James Hansen is clear on that now, Bill Gates is clear on that. There's a whole host that Michael Moore has finally come out in the last 2 months and said, I finally understand now that wind energy is not the solution I thought it was. So what's left is a group of crony capitalists who are profiting from this. But, you know, you're right, there's a host of issues, but the facts are as I have stated them, and I'm not here to solve your energy problems, I'm here to say, if they're using this line of argument, you need to understand there's way more to it than that. Is there any
Thank
other
you.
questions?
I think that's an interesting point you make about the proximity of the towers to adjacent property. We were former land permit holders. They expired after 10 years. We did not renew. And because of an adjacent project install, it restricted me being able to put 3 on 160 down to 1. Let alone the impact of a house we wanted to build there, and the impact on our livestock that do not want to graze next to the towers because of electrical stray current and noise. We have documented significant changes in productivity next to those.
That's not uncommon, I hear that a
So
lot.
it's interesting, but I think that's fascinating about why the setback isn't off the property line. There's no other conditional use permit that I'm aware of for an industrial setting where the impact can negatively impact the property value if I did want to put wind towers on my existing property because they built theirs first.
Well, and that's the
So
big,
even within their own paradigm, that's a problem.
well, that's one of the big problems with such a diffuse source of energy like wind and solar in the first place, is it takes a tremendous quantity of these devices to produce anything close to a reasonable amount of energy. In Michigan, I've added up, it's also true in Ohio, every gas, coal, and nuclear power plant in the state of Michigan will fit in just one township. All of them, all the power that we have can come from one township. Yet we've covered 30 townships with wind turbines so far to produce only 6-7% of our electricity from wind. I mean, yet we can't replace those existing plants with just wind alone. You still have to build the other forms of generation. And to this gentleman's point, the wind guys from DTE demonize gas, and then the gas guys shoved a gas pipeline through my brother's township where he was a township official and said, yeah, we know you've already been thrown under the wind bus, right? So why are they building a 42-inch gas line through the township? Because they're switching from coal to gas and a little bit of wind and getting paid for the gas pipeline, getting paid for the gas power plant, getting paid for the wind generators, and having far more environmental impact. 1 or 2 nukes would have done far more good for our environment than anything that we've done with wind development there. But I'm not here advocating for nukes. It's just a matter of facts as far as what the technology is capable of. Any
Okay,
other-
Kevin, I think we're ready. We might be able, hopefully we'll be able to entertain some more
I'll
questions.
hang around afterwards.
You can hang around afterwards, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Kendall and Kathy right here, let's see, they're spokesmen for the Informed Farmer Coalition, and Kathy's a school teacher. They've been involved with this Informed Farmer Coalition for about 10 years, living and farming among the wind turbines. The big sky, it's in your program here, and the last 2 years, wind farms are being built. And you probably talk about your hay background and some of those things as part of your discussion. So with that, and Kathy.
Go for it. Okay, we live in northern Bureau County, just a mile from Lee County, so we kind of cover both of them. And I just want to share our experiences living beside 2 different wind farm projects. I share the same sun, the same planet as each one of you, and I want you to understand that each of you could experience the same things that we are experiencing. But how that affects you, you won't know until the project is built and until it's too late. And like one guy said, well, it hasn't ever bothered me. I said, well, that's wonderful if it doesn't. But how about your kids? How about your grandkids? Do you know how it's going to affect them? Are they going to be able to come and visit you or not? This video here, it'll be in the background, is what I took in July of 15, I think. You can see our farm buildings there in the background. And that's showing one morning, the shadow flicker out in my hayfield. The whole thing is about 27 minutes long. It started before I got out there, and it continued a little on past what I could film. But I wanted to show you what I experienced when I'm out in the field. And I'm very subject to shadow flicker. Somebody asked, well, did that make you sick? And I said, yes. I got a terrible headache. It lasted all day. And that's a predecessor to losing my breakfast or lunch or supper or whatever I'm already eating. Unfortunately, a wind farm, when it comes into the community, you'll have those people that are against the project. Then you're gonna have those who can't voice their own opinion, because usually they have a small business. And if they say, well, I'm for the wind project, then those who are against it won't do business with it. If they say, I'm against it, then those that are for it won't do business with it. So they're caught in the middle. They can't even voice their own opinion. Then you're gonna have a few that don't care, or at least they don't care for a while, till they experience a negative effect. Maybe the negative effects don't affect them, which they're lucky then, if it doesn't. The wind farm company, when they come in and start proposing this, they won't tell you about the soil compaction that the farmers, the landowners are gonna exist, and possibly some of the neighbors. The crane that they bring in weighs about 1.5 million pounds. A lot of times they'll drive that around on wood mats that they keep advancing in front of the crane. Sometimes they don't. I have pictures where they drove across the field without the mats, and in parts of the field they were cutting a 22-inch rut that is 7 feet wide, plus the other track on the other side doing the same thing. Well, they say, well, we'll fix that. We'll bring in a chisel plow, rip that up, and fill it in. That doesn't fix it. Imagine a clay pot. You take some clay, give it to a potter. He makes a clay pot out of it, and it works well. But then you don't want that clay pot anymore. So you take a hammer and break it up. And I don't care how many hundreds of thousands of pieces you break it into, all you have is a broken clay pot. You don't have soil again, because you have changed the tilth or the structure of that soil. It takes Mother Nature hundreds or thousands of years to take that broken clay pot and turn it back into soil. So just filling in the ruts doesn't fix the problem of the ruts, it just covers it up. Okay, talk briefly about the shadow flicker and how it can affect me, and it does affect others too, but each of you would know if motion sickness or shadow flicker is a problem for you. The only way you can stop shadow flicker from coming in your house, dark curtains won't work. Closing your eyes doesn't work. If you want to do a quick experiment, look up at the lights, close your eyes, and wave your hand in front of your face, and you'll experience shadow flicker. So even your eyelids won't stop it. Anything that passes any amount of light allows shadow flicker to come through it, or like blinds, it'll come around it. The only two things that can stop shadow flicker in the house is plywood or tinfoil. Something that absolutely passes zero light. And I didn't move into my house 40 years ago to live in a cave because I have to shut everything down to stop the shadow flicker. Just this last Sunday night, I woke up at midnight and wondered, why did I wake up? When I got my eyes open and realized all of a sudden, I'm getting hit square in the face in the middle of the night, at midnight, with moon flicker. And the wind turbine companies never talk about that. They always talk about the sun doing it. It was a half moon. The turbine that hits us often in the wintertime was lined up with the window and everything, and it was hitting me square on the face in the middle of the night and woke me up. And that was with only a half moon. If it had been a full moon, it would have been much worse. I even did roll over and look up at the, or look at the one wall on the backside, and it was bouncing off the wall too, so I couldn't get away from it. I make 400 to 500 acres of hay a year, and I'll cut each field 6 times. So we're cutting it, we're raking it, we're baling it. So that's at least, and then picking the bales up, but at least 3 trips across that field each time. Times 6, times all the different fields. All the fields are surrounded now with wind turbines, so I've got to contend with that all the time. One year, and it happened to be this field here. It was late in the evening, and I got it opened up so the next morning would be ready to go when the crew was there, so we'd get that field picked. That morning, there again, just like this was shown in the morning, we had shadow flicker. I could not pick that field. I had to move to a different field and spend a lot of extra time to get the field opened up so that we were ready to go. So that was not very productive. They will tell you that, oh, you plant trees around the house to stop the shadow flicker. Okay, you plant a tree this big, how many years are you expected to wait for it to grow before it's gonna grow up high enough to do any good? On the south side of our house, we have a couple trees that are close enough together, they're interlaced. Even with the leaves on there, shadow flicker can come through it. And the one turbine that is southwest of our house, that hits us in the wintertime, oh my gosh, there's no leaves left on the tree. So trying to plant trees as a Band-Aid to fix it does not work. When they go to the county board and the zoning and everything, they want to get an allowance for 30 hours of shadow flicker before they have to consider any payments to you. Before they came, I had 0 hours of shadow flicker. So having to put up with it for 30 hours is not at all a reasonable request. That shadow flicker not only just comes in the windows, but it bounces off everything inside the house. It'll bounce off the different walls, anything reflective, of course, like a mirror or some glass, it'll bounce off. Different times, we'll be sitting there doing some work at the desk, and I'll be at the table beside her, and all of a sudden I'm quiet. And she's, well, how come you're not answering me? Fall asleep? No, I'm sitting there with my eyes shut, hand over my face, looking down at the table, something dark, just trying for 10, 15, 20 minutes to avoid that shadow flicker. I get a lot of ringing in my ears. When I'm away from home long enough, that ringing diminishes or maybe even subsides. All of last week, I was up at Madison, Wisconsin at World Dairy Expo. We left, and I was up there Monday. About Thursday, I noticed that the ringing in my ears was not quite totally gone, but much diminished. By Saturday, it was diminished. Now, I've gotten back home for a few days, and I got ringing in my ears again. The noise from the turbines is very distracting. And they'll tell you, well, there's a swoosh of the blades as it goes past the tower. They don't tell you that even if that turbine is not rotating, there is noise coming out of that nacelle unit on top, because they're running a generator, a fan, or something to consume electricity, to keep the power lines charged that are underground, to keep them dry. So there's noise there even when it's not turning. And that's a distraction for me because I've been farming all my life. And if you've been around equipment, farm equipment in particular, you train yourself to listen to the equipment. If you all of a sudden don't hear a noise that you should, it grabs your attention. You don't know why, but you know something happened. I was given Our Lady pasture riding the combine one time. Started across the field, visiting with her a little bit, pointing out different things. All of a sudden, I just stopped. What's wrong? I said, I don't know, but something changed. Well, I hadn't noticed that I'd gotten into a wet spot. There was still a fair amount of stalk there, but no ears of corn. Nothing coming through the head, nothing through the combine. It got quieter. My instant reaction was, I stopped because something changed. Then I realized what it was, a lack of noise. But also, if something gets noisier, slip clutch brakes, or reacts, or something, then that extra noise, it's not normal, it gets your attention. So when these turbines are turning on and off, and just in the period here that I've been talking to you, I could be out in the yard and have one or two of them close by turn on and off 4 or 5 times already. And that gets your attention. Oh, that thing turned on again, or turned off. It's a huge distraction. Now when you're trying to focus on what you're doing, especially when we're doing the hay and we're up around the baling site and we're wrapping, you're trying to be cautious of other people that are around there, the guy pulling samples out of the bales or the people that are helping put plastic on the wrapper. You've got to be cautious of those other people, so you're trying to pay attention, and this other noise is definitely a distraction. The Illinois Pollution Control Board has standards and guidelines and maximum levels that the companies are supposed to abide by. The problem is there's no recourse or no penalties set by the county board. If you exceed this maximum, you are going to pay a big penalty. Now, if they charge them a $1,000 penalty, that's nothing. That's not even pocket change. it was $1 million penalty, it might kind of get their attention. But there's nothing like that set in place to protect us. And if you would say, well, I'll go out and I'll get some sound recording equipment and I'll check it out myself and I'll have this recording, I can show it to somebody. They'll throw it out because you're not a trained audiologist to record this. You don't have the properly, a very expensive equipment to record this. And even if you did have enough money to hire somebody to do this, you'd take them to court, and they've got a lot bigger checkbook than you do, and it'd take you forever to get any payment from them for that. Broken tiles are a problem. I mentioned these big cranes are going across the field, and they can go across the fields anywhere they want. Now, they sound like the good guy. They approach a farmer and say, we had this contract, we would like to have a wind generator on your farm, and we're the good guys, we'll pay you $10 an acre for the whole farm just to show you that we're the good guys. If you signed that, all you did was, and I'm gonna be a little bit blunt, you sold your farm for $10 an acre to the devil. Because that means they can drive anywhere on that farm they want with no recourse. If they have a wind tower here or one over here in the neighbors, they don't have to go by the roads, they just go straight across the field. Irrespective, water lines, tile lines, anything else. They do what they want. What was already mentioned, wind energy doesn't replace anything. If the wind quits blowing, there has to be something for a backup. Wind farms are constantly bought and sold. We've got one just south of us, Walnut Ridge. Everybody says, well, that'll be good, and that was being built by Berkshire Hathaway. They don't own it anymore. They had a chance to sell it for billions of dollars, so they did. I have a guy that works for me part-time. He farms down there in that project. 2 of them got put on the farm. It wasn't his idea, but he wasn't the one in charge. And they did some fence damage, tore out some brand new fences, and some road damage and crop damage. He'd been trying for 1.5 years to get paid just for something as simple as crop damage. And for 3, 4, maybe 5 months, the guy that he was supposed to get in contact with was not available by phone, or even if you tried to catch him down at the office, his pickup might be there, but the doors were locked and he couldn't get an answer. And he still hasn't gotten paid to this date. So you never know, with that constant selling and purchasing, you never know who you're talking with. The one that went up close to us first, we were supposed to contact them if we had problems with shadow flicker. Well, that worked kind of well for a little while, until they got sold 3 times. We lost track of phone numbers, and we could not find anybody to get a hold of. The companies, there again, I'm going to be a little blunt, they do like to lie to you. When they're out getting people to sign up, the one agent will say, well, you might as well sign this, your neighbors have. And the guy said, oh yeah? This guy over here signed, right? Yeah, okay, I got him on speed dial. Did you sign? No, okay, thank you. They did not sign. They'll like to tell a little old land lady in Arizona, well, ma'am, you might as well sign, all your neighbors have. Oh, okay. They will lie to you. During construction, they will lie to you. They're supposed to go by an ag mitigation agreement in this one that's being just built north of us. They were out there this spring, early summer, when it was terrible, terrible muddy, trying to put these things in. Mud was flying everywhere. And yet it says the farmer can't be out in the field doing farm work. You can't be out there either. Finally, some people on the county board realized what was going on, come out and saw it for themselves, took them to court real quick, and they did get them stopped. But in the meantime, it made a terrible mess. Crop damage is a problem. I talked about that. They'll like to say, well, we'll give money to your school. It'll help the school. It'll help the school for the first year. Then most of the time, and Ohio's an exception because it's a really small school, and I think they're using them as a poster child. But most of the time then the state will realize, oh, you're getting all this money from the turbine company, then you don't need our money because we're broke. the net gain is 0 or maybe a little bit negative to the school. We've experienced that. The county likes to think, well, it's gonna help cure our budget woes. Maybe the first year, because they get $500,000, $600,000 for the permit, but then ask a county board member how much they get per turbine per year after that. Well, I don't know. It's almost nothing. Maybe $1,000 a year per turbine. Well, if you've got 130 turbines in the county, $130,000 versus a $17 million budget, that doesn't make much difference. Ice throw, been talked about a little bit, we have experienced it. We're, the closest one from us is straight south, 1,400 feet. When ice starts hitting your mailbox, you get a little bit concerned about it. If you sign anything, even as a neighbor, because here again, they come to us, well, we'll pay you a little bit for being close by, we're the good guys. Okay, what are you gonna pay us? Well, the first thing you have to sign is this. I'm gonna call it a gag order, because that's exactly what it is. They call it a confidentiality statement. No, it's a gag order. That's the very first thing you have to sign before they will talk about anything with money or anything else with you. Because they don't want you talking negatively about them.
So did you sign it?
No, absolutely not.
Just asking.
That's a fair question. In the contract, it says you will not have any hazardous materials on your farm. Guess what anhydrous ammonia, a nitrogen fertilizer is? It's classified as a hazardous material. You also can't dig a hole to bury a cow, bury a junk building on your property unless you get their permission. And who are you going to find as the owner that say, yes, I have the authority to give you that permission? It's hard to do. And then even try to get them to agree to it. Well, that's what I have for right now. We're going to let my wife talk a little bit, and then I've got a few things I want to kind of summarize with.
Okay, the last comment he made about you can't do things on your farm with hazardous materials. There are some people that we know that wanted to dig a hole to bury some trees, and they were all ready to dig a hole until the contractor came and realized that, you know, they had signed this agreement, and they could not get permission to dig that hole where they wanted to. The other thing that concerns me is one of the wind turbine farms about 45 miles from us had been sold 4 or 5 times. One of those times was to the Chinese company, and technically, according to the contract these people signed, they could come in and tell them you can't spray with this or that chemical because it's skull and crossbones, it's hazardous. Do you really want a foreign country telling you what you can and can't do in your farm? But I will say that some of the things that we talk about, not all of you will experience. It depends on where you live, what the topography of your land is, what buildings you have around that sound bounces off of, and that type of thing. As my husband's motion sick, that bothers him. When I'm out in the field, I'm not motion sick, but I will say when I'm cutting hay and I'm looking down at my cutter, you know, I see in my peripheral vision these wind towers going around. And it would probably be okay if they all went around at the same speed, but you know, they're going all like this, and that's very disorienting until I get about halfway in the field, and then I'm far enough away from them, they're not in my peripheral vision. It depends on how wide your peripheral vision is. You know, some people have a narrower tunnel and they won't see those things. It's just like sound. Some people will say, I don't hear the wind turbines. One of our neighbors is that way, but then he's the first to admit, well, he's hard of hearing. And, you know, so different people are gonna experience different things. And if it doesn't bother you, it's going to be very hard to believe that it bothers someone else. But just keep in mind that, you know, where your house is positioned to the closest turbines may make a big difference as to what you do or do not feel. So we'll just talk a little bit about lights. We'll gotta figure out how to run this thing. So this is what everybody sees at night, the FAA lights, from a distance. You know, they turn on, turn off, turn on, turn off. And you think that that's what you see if you live in the footprint or beside the wind turbines. That is not what you see when you live beside the wind turbines. What you see is this. That's the blade going around. That's just one turbine. What you saw before were about 4 or 5 turbines. But this is one turbine, and that's the blades going around. So instead of seeing a light turn on and off, as you do from a distance, it's kind of more like a popcorn effect. It's on, because of those 3 blades going around in front of the light.
Depends on which way the wind's coming from.
It is exactly, you're right. And this is what they look like in the fog. You get a glow in the fog. And see, you can hear these things going, and this was just my little camera. But you get that broad out, so it's not just that small little light anymore, it's quite a distance.
While she's looking that up, that one foggy night when we had that, I thought there was a serious fire somewhere because of all that orange glow in the sky. A real serious fire. It wasn't. It was just that red light on the top of the turbine bouncing off the fog.
I may have to, I must have done this with my phone and had it turned the other direction. But this is from my upstairs bedroom, what I see out my bedroom window. Now, I'm up high enough, you can see the light go across the blade as the blade comes across. And you're gonna say, well, but you're supposed to be sleeping at night, Kathy. Well, that's true, but as my husband said earlier, we both grew up in farms, that noise, you hear that noise. And then when the wind turbine turns off and you suddenly wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're sitting there, why am I awake at 3 o'clock in the morning? You realize, oh, it's quiet out, the wind turbine turned off. So that's why I woke up. Well, then you fall back asleep and maybe half an hour later you wake up again and you say, why am I awake? And it's like, oh, the wind turbine turned back on. So these are the closest ones to my house, and this is on a normal night. And this is what I'm going to see out my bedroom window. Enough on FAA lights. Let's talk about shadow flicker. So this is what shadow flicker starts about November 4th at our house and ends about February 2nd. And obviously that day it was a lot louder. the speed of them, it depends on how fast the wind is going. And as my husband said, they will turn them on and off, and sometimes as much as 3-4 times in 20 minutes. And sometimes they run continual, and some days they don't run. It's an awesome day when they don't run. You can hear the birds, you can hear the crickets, you know, it's things that we came out to the farm to hear. But with that south window and the two west windows that I have, I do not just get shadow flicker. I again get a popcorn effect. It hits the south window, west window. You know, south window, west window, northwest window. So I'll get it 3 times every time the blade goes around instead of just once. It will reflect off of everything. Inside your home, if you have a glass door on a curio cabinet or on a hutch or anything like that, it will reflect off that glass back to the other wall of your house. One day I was, because when they first came online, I was up at St. Charles teaching, and so I didn't catch on to them until the 2nd year. And I'm thinking, my computer monitor's going out. My computer faces the south. It's like, you know, it's flickering. The monitor must be going. And then I turned around and looked at the north wall. And the light was coming in the west windows, reflecting off the north wall, which reflected a shadow back onto my monitor and made it look like it was flickering. So I thought, okay, can't be in the living room doing book work. I'll go out to the kitchen and wash dishes. I always have dishes to wash. I went out in the kitchen, got a north window. Shadows reflecting off the barn back into the north window of the kitchen. It's like, all right, you know, I'll go to some other room. I can't go to my east dining room because I've got the south window there too. I can't go to my sewing room because I've got a west and a north window. The bedroom, south and west windows. The spare bedroom, south window. The have a school, what I call a school workroom upstairs, north window reflecting off the barn back into the house again. Okay, where can I be? I can be in a 10 by 15 laundry room only because I can shut 2 doors and not get any shadow flicker in there. Now I like laundry, but I don't like it every day for half an hour. So, you know, that's some of the things that, depending on where your house is, you may never have that problem. But some of you could easily have that problem. So this is what it looks like when it's inside. Whoops. Well, maybe what it looks like. So this is inside the bedroom, and you can see, you know, this is what's going on 3:37 in the afternoon. We're getting shadow flicker in. Now, if you, yes?
In that video, were you trying to demonstrate how the blinds were closed on that window or the blinds behind
The
you?
blinds were closed on the other window too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does it look like
The
there's a lot of
blinds are
sunlight
closed on
in
all the windows. And in fact, we've gone to this bubble wrap that has aluminum or tin foil on both sides of it. And we've cut that and pushed that in the windows to help reduce some of this. But, you know, I would like to look out my windows and have daylight. If you have antenna TV, you might be affected depending on where your station is coming from. We used to get Rockford stations, Quad City stations. We still get Quad City stations every once in a while though, it gets interfered with. Our Rockford stations are just about gone. But these are some things that, you know, we were watching our cousin's kid on a basketball game, the state tournament, high school tournament, and this is what kept happening. And it got worse. After this, it finally just totally went to the extent, and we didn't end up seeing anything. And that was something we'll never get to see again because, we don't have a video of it.
If you got DirecTV or Dish, when the weather gets bad, it does that too.
Oh, does it?
Yep.
Well, our antenna doesn't seem to do that. You know, we were good with antenna. And of course, the wind company will tell you, well, we'll give you, I think it was $2,300 so that you can get cable for 1 year. And then it's your expense after that. And that's not what we want. This was an example of something we were trying to, you know, we were trying to listen to people. Gas station. And it got to the point, it wasn't worth launching the program. So that's another thing some people will have, some people won't. It, again, depends on where those turbines are located or sited, as you were talking about, to the nearest home. Our home is 1,400 and, he calls it 1,400 feet. It's really 1,425 feet from the nearest one. And, you know, this is what happens to us.
How tall are your turbines?
407 feet.
600 feet is around my house.
And we know the ones, because we've got 100, I think it's 168 in the Big Sky project that is to the east and a little bit to the south, to the east and to the north of us. When I look out my dining room, well, I have a picture here later, I can show you what I see when I look out my dining room window. I can see 44 wind towers out my dining room window.
How many?
44. And we're almost the second highest spot in Bureau County, aren't we?
Yeah.
Up on top of the hill is. And so we do see a big area out there. Since then, a year and a half ago, they put up and are in production with Walnut Ridge, which I think was about another 133. And then now to the north of us, they're putting up Green River Wind Farm, and I think that was, again, about 160 wind towers. And I was just counting the other day when I was out in the field, how many towers I can see so far from just my one field right north of the house. And I could count 48 towers, and there were still a couple of them that were going up that didn't have the blades on yet. So I don't know what I'll see when they turn the FAA lights on.
Kathy, in the interest of time, I want to make sure that you address vibration, because that, okay, I didn't know if that was coming up for you. For the interest of time, I want to make
Yeah.
sure.
So this was a decibel reading that I got in the daytime. I have a nighttime one that was running between 57 and 67 decibels, all much higher than what they say. And again, we can't prove it if you take them to court because we're not licensed audiologists. But the one to the east and the two to the south of us, all between 1,400 feet to 2,200 feet, sometimes sounds like you're in O'Hare Airport. Not every night. When it is really, really foggy out, and high humidity out, it's going to be a lot louder. When the ground is frozen, it'll be louder. And my husband doesn't experience this, but I have this wonderful vibrating bed at night when those conditions are going on. And actually, it's not the bed that vibrates, it's my chest that sits there and goes like this all night long. It's a horrible feeling. I thought when I first time it happened, it's like, oh my is this what it is? And then I decided the next morning I was still alive, so I must be okay. And I didn't say anything to anybody right away, and we were talking to our neighbors, and they live in a timber. And they have a totally different experience than we do. They get the honor of having that sound bounce off every tree in the timber, and it sounds much different at their house. And he was complaining too about this vibration in his chest, yet his wife never felt it. And so it's not going to affect all of you. And I mean, that's the main point. Some of it, you are going to have that. You won't know until it's up, whether or not it's going to affect you and how it's going to affect you. So just a couple of quick pictures in a PowerPoint here. I'll zip through some of them. But it does interrupt your sleep. I mean, we haven't had a good night's sleep. Well, we went away last weekend. They were good night sleeps. And I too have ringing in my ears. But I'm lucky. It takes him 3-4 days to get rid of it when he goes away. Right now, I don't have it. I mean, I can just, go any place where we're not in those wind turbines, and within a matter of 4 to 8 hours, I have no ringing in my ears. I'll go back home, and when the wind towers turn on, the ringing comes back. So they call it kind of stress-induced. And again, some people are affected, some people are not. Give you an idea, my house is right here. All those, whoops, I guess I could get this bigger so you could see this.
It's all right.
So my house is right here where the little red dot is, and all of these circled things are the wind towers. Now they will say we do not live in a wind farm in the footprint, because you go like this and we're out of the footprint. I say if you go from here to here, we're still in the footprint, but we live beside the wind towers. Okay. 7 miles away, they don't look bad. How do I get this to go? 3.5 miles away, you can still see them. Getting to 1.75 miles, they're getting bigger because I'm getting closer. This is 2/3 to 1 mile away from our house. This is coming up within about 1/4 mile of our house, and they kind of tower over trees that have been there for probably 80 to 100 years, yeah. And these are the ones, our house is just south of these two towers, get a little closer. This is looking in my house yard, looking at 3 of the wind turbines. This is the corner of my house, and this is out my east window. So I'm inside the house now, I'm looking out my east window, and I'm looking to the south a little bit there. This is right across the road. This is where he was talking about the tree leaves filled in, but that still doesn't get rid of the noise and or the shadow flicker. This is looking outside of my house window. Old house, kind of has those windows that are a little distorted. And, but now, this is inside my house. That was the reflection of those wind towers that I just took outside my house, coming through my windows, hitting off of my computer screen monitor back, actually hitting off of the glass door onto my computer screen monitor. So you can't get away from it. It's in your house. And the foggy conditions, no matter where you look. I was sitting in my truck one day, I just got home from work, and I looked in my rearview window, and doggone, there's that wind tower staring back at me from my rearview window. And this is what we had to put in our house to try to keep out the light at night. This is what it looks like when the sun is behind those wind towers, and I'm going to start getting shadow flicker. So,
Are these on your property?
none of these are on our property.
Not on your property.
They are all of our neighbors, and our neighbor lives, one of them lives about 8 miles away, one of them lives about 17 miles away, so they don't have to put up with this other than when they're in their field working. They don't have to live beside it, so that's kind of, as the gentleman was saying, what is your right to infringe on someone else's?
Okay, before, that's that, Ken will wrap up. And I went to their home and knocked on the door, and I said, oh, they must be shelling corn next door. And they had crossed the lane, and there were some trees, and there was a building, and I turned around, and it was a wind turbine, and the wind must have been just right, but it was making a racket, just like you heard, and I was standing at their front door next to their mailbox, so. Kind of wrap it up, guys.
Okay, real quick. On the repowering, they'll like to tell the landowner when they sign a contract, well, these are good for 20 years, and then there's a 20-year that we could renew your contract. It doesn't last that long. Ours has been up for 9 years, and they're already proposing to take them down and repower with, oh my gosh, bigger ones. And that's only after 9 years. There again, he talked about the tax credits that run out after 10, so they want to keep those. So that means they're going to be back in the farmer's fields with all this heavy equipment. Now that's assuming they go by the original contract where they bring in that big crane and take it down. No, they're trying to get the county to change their mind and say, well, this is the new industry standard, which only one company's doing and just started doing. They're going to just tilt them over, cut them in half at the ground level, and just flop them over. Then bring in and start cutting up all the pieces, trying to pick up the fiberglass and get rid of them. And then what they don't tell you, once they get the fiberglass loaded on the truck, it goes to a landfill. Somewhere we've got a picture showing, at first you think, well, there's a great big snowdrift. No, it's rows and rows and rows of white fiberglass blades waiting to get buried in a landfill. Okay, they wanted to, so there again, they were proposing to tilt and drop, well, we'll drop them on the road. Let's see, the tower's here, the road comes over like this and like this. How are you gonna hit an angling road? Or maybe the road's straight and the tower's 490 feet and the road's 520 feet away. There's a power line there. That doesn't sound like a good idea. They've got a concrete base, and they say, well, we'll take the concrete down, the transmissions line, anything higher than 5 feet, we'll take it off. Well, that makes an awful big rock down there, though, because 5 foot down, that's fine, except corn roots go down 8 feet, and alfalfa roots go down 20. Then they don't even talk about if they're gonna drop them over, what it could do to your gas well, your water pipes, plaster in your house, or anything else like that.
This is an example of Mendota Hills repowered, and they went from 275 feet to the 500-foot one. So not all of the bases, that's what he was saying, are being used. Because a lot of times when they repower, they'll, like in their place, I think they took out 26 of them. Because the bigger towers, they could get more production, they didn't need to put as many back up. So they had to take down all of their towers and build new cement. Ours, they say, are big enough they can just put up taller towers. But this is what it looks like. This man was taping this from his house 3,500 feet away as the drop and tilt went down. And he felt the vibration in his home. It rattled his windows. My concern is I'm only 1,400 feet away. Is my plaster coming down? Are my old pipes going to fracture? So this is what tilt and drop looks like. If they ever talk about repowering, this is a tilt and drop. The wind company will say there's no vibration on the ground. Gentleman 3,500 feet away felt it. You know, it's up to you to make up your mind.
That dented the ground, the length of the tower, about 6 feet.
Have your property taxes went down at all?
No.
We haven't sold, we don't know. There's nothing been sold right in our area. They will like to point out one example where the property didn't go down. It was a farmette, if you would. Let's see. The guy's parents live here. He wanted to buy this farmette. He's a 1/4 mile away. It had a barn so he could raise a little bit of livestock. He's a trucker, he had sold a business, he'd got some spending money, he wanted that property, so he paid for it. He didn't care about the property value. So they like to use that, but in general, the trend would be yes.
Like
No,
your,
I
like
think
your
what she asked was
taxes,
the
your
taxes.
yearly
The
taxes.
Oh,
have
taxes?
gone down.
No.
They haven't gone down.
We own, we've got some property in Ohio. The state hasn't taken their money away, but it's a pretty small school district. But I have watched, and the school taxes have not gone down. Now, they might say, well, they haven't gone up as fast as they might have otherwise. Okay, but they haven't gone down like you were trying to sell us on the idea when this project is going up.
Any other questions? Go. We got a few minutes.
You said that the tracks from the, cranes would, you know, but they didn't ever go across your land, did they?
Almost.
They cut the
But,
corner.
okay, we're right at a crossroad. They were going diagonally across the crossroad from this, participant to this participant. We were on the northwest corner of the intersection, and then there was the southeast corner. They wanted to, instead of driving down the hill to get to that intersection, they wanted to go across the non-participant's land, loop out about just shy of a quarter mile and come across his field without permission. The contractor told the crane operator, no, you're going this way. But they still cut about 70 feet across the corner of his field. With crane mats, with smaller
Of
cranes.
your field?
No, the neighbor's field, catty corner.
Non-participating.
Non-participating, without permission.
Okay, other questions? Okay,
Yes.
Linda.
Let's say you put your house on the market tomorrow and someone comes to tour the home to sell. What do you think the likelihood is that it's gonna be a positive outcome?
I don't know, but unfortunately, because we already know that certain things that can happen, we have to disclose that to any potential buyer. So, you know, we know we have a gas well that was dug almost 80 to 100 years ago. We know it has fragile pipes. We know if they repower and don't take those down by crane, they could fracture our pipes. The house can explode because we can have gas seepage in there. You don't smell that gas. It's, you know, coming up out of the ground. It's not like in town where they put an odor in it. So we will have to disclose that if we were going to sell them.
Well, I'm just saying if they come in to look and you have to have all this stuff in your windows to keep the flicker down, if I was looking at the property, I would kind of not be enthused about that.
Well,
Right.
and yes, I can take it all out, and I can let them look around, but if they ask me a question, I've got to answer, yes, we have to put this up because it
Right.
bothers us. Now, maybe they wouldn't be bothered by it.
Yes.
Comment and question. I personally live within 2 windmills that are very close. I can run to them. I'm a pretty fat kid, so I consider it pretty close. I personally don't have any kind of effect from them or anything like that. As a matter of fact, I personally had a Air Force veteran who got out of it around the Cold War era. Personally, when camping with him, I couldn't make any kind of breath without waking him up. He ended up staying at my place, and the only thing he had to say was the highway was too loud. He never said anything about the windows.
No.
Well,
So
and
it's
it
gonna affect
depends-
everybody different.
And it
I
depends on
completely
where
agree
you
with you.
stay. You
And,
know,
to kind of come back to your letter that you disclosed at the beginning of this meeting,
From the superintendent?
yes, sir.
Okay, go.
Have you heard anything about kids getting affected by these windows in your area?
Yes. There's, one
Um,
autistic child,
Well, that
they
now,
can't come in the area.
you know, that's, I was on a bus with autistic children for 10 years. There's a lot of things that they
There-
can't
yeah.
do. That's not,
and the big thing is with that extra noise and that he wasn't getting to sleep. So he definitely had a real problem.
But the bottom line is, the person that lives there that has an autistic child should not have to put up with that.
Yeah, and
That
they bought
should
the
not-
home before the
They should not
towers.
be allowed to devalue their quality of life.
Does
But
he
like I
live,
said,
does
you
he
know,
live within these windmills? Is that what you're saying, or he just comes visit?
no, he lives within them.
Okay.
And, you know, we've had, in the county, one doctor, got up and testified that he did not personally know anyone who suffered any, vibration or ringing of the ears. And I keep thinking, one doctor in Bureau County, but sir, we don't go to you. You're way down in the south part of the county. We're way up in the north. There's more than one doctor. But, you know, that is what the wind farm brought in. But again, you may not experience it. When the gentleman stayed with you, you know, maybe they weren't as loud that day, because there are days that they're not real loud. When the wind speed is maybe only 4 or 5 miles per hour, but when it gets up into the 8 to 12
Change in
mile
speed,
mile,
change in atmospheric conditions, you
And
can't predict.
and just personal ability to tolerate things. So, like I said at the beginning, you may not all experience this. None of you may experience it, but
Okay, go ahead,
you might.
question?
You know, I live next to the wind farm here in Henry County, it's 242 windmills. And it's just curious to me why no one from Henry County in this existing wind farm is here with comments similar to yours.
Maybe
I don't
they
know
have.
people that live in
Okay,
it.
Linda could probably answer
We
that.
did a survey, and there's someone that lives on 81 that has 4 wind turbines around her. She has 2 to the north, 2 to the south. She has all of those issues: lack of sleep. She has problems with her internet, with her television, even her cell phone. The wind turbine company said, well, we'll just turn them off for a couple of hours during the day, or several hours. And she said, I'm not in prison. I should be able to enjoy my home, and I should be able to enjoy my property without having to have those shut off for 4 hours a day. I mean,
Part of
it,
it goes back to the issue where I said it splits the community. Some people can't express their opinion, their experience, because it's gonna negatively affect them from one group or the other, that's for them or for against them.
Well, and they have businesses that they're.
Okay, didn't last fall you take a survey?
that was
of-
what I just talked about, the
But how
survey.
many people did you survey? And
We
there were-
surveyed 15 people that were not landowners, but lived amongst the turbines on the west part of the county.
Out
And-
of 242 turbines?
But a lot of the people over there, Diane, they're leaseholders, they're landowners. We surveyed the people that were not leaseholders, but lived within them.
Lawrence Berkeley National Lab did a study on this, and I skipped over the slide. So the same people that did the study on wind turbine property values, the same outfit did a study on local acceptance of wind projects and social acceptance of these things. And if you look at it, you get out to 5 miles, they looked out to 5 miles. As a percentage, at 5 miles away, very few people have many objections. Within a half mile, the objections rise very quickly, but even at 5 miles, like 47% had a strong objection to the visual impacts. And within a quarter mile, many people reported being able to hear the wind turbines inside their house with the windows closed. So, but nobody's making a claim that everybody's gonna experience these things. But when Berkeley National Lab does a national study on it, it's not a trivial quantity of people that have these objections. The other thing that I left out of my talk in the interest of time is in Michigan, townships get a chance to vote on these zoning amendments if they have an option, if there's an amendment for zoning to let wind in or to not wind it in. 20 times the townships in Michigan have had a chance to vote on permissive wind energy zoning, and 20 times wind has lost. 20 out of 20. Even when Invenergy spent $164,000 on PR in one township and the folks spent $2,500, they still lost 45% at the ballot box. Huron County with 420 turbines had a chance for 150 more. DT and NextEra spent $1 million on PR in a countywide referendum, and they still lost 65 to 35%. They got 425 turbines. They know what it's like. So yes, we know there are people that have no objection to turbines. We also know, I've gotten calls from leaseholders that said, can you get me out of my lease? I've had leaseholders testify, or like wind turbine neighbors here, saying it's the biggest mistake I ever made in my life. And I know a lot of leaseholders who've said to me, I would stand up and speak out, but my contract says I have to support the project and I cannot speak. But nobody's making the claim that everybody's gonna hate this, but I guarantee you that without turbines, nobody's having any trouble with them. So what's an acceptable loss rate? 10%, 20%, 30%? That's the real question, and I would say that nobody would drive across the bridge if it only had a 90% chance of getting across it safely every day. Why would we accept zoning that has a 10 to 20% loss rate?
So here's the rub. Linda stated that 15 people surveyed were unhappy. Are any of them here tonight?
No,
Why is
no,
that
not
fair
that I
to
know.
us?
What is that?
Well,
Here's the rub, how close do you live to a tower on your proposed property?
On my proposed property?
Yeah, how close will you be to a tower? Your house?
About 1,600.
And you don't have it yet?
No, but the closest one to me now is half a mile.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
The
the
1,600 is real
wind
different.
turbine company will tell you that when you do ask them, they'll say, you know, do you know of anybody that has a problem? No, they don't know of anybody that has a problem, but their term of a problem is different than ours. Their term is if they mitigate it and give you money to take care of it, it's no longer a problem. We wouldn't take the money. Two of our neighbors took the money. They can't talk. They would like to, but they can't talk because they signed a contract that said we will not talk out against the wind farm.
And not everybody has what it takes to stand in front of a room full of people. I also know that in communities where the county is strongly in favor of it, they feel it's pointless to express themselves, particularly in Michigan, where a lot of those county officials have wind leases. We also did a study door to door in Tuscola County in an existing NextEra wind project and correlated the complaints with the distance from the turbines. And what do you know? Less than a half mile is where the turbine complaints increase down to 1,000 to 13 feet. Half mile and up, very few complaints about noise. Well, that's totally consistent with everything we've seen from the World Health Organization and other reputable sources. At 1,200, 1,400 feet, the complaints are far higher than at 3,000. That's just the facts.
Okay, Blackhawk's gonna turn out the lights. I wanna thank these guys for coming. I especially wanna thank because this is a public information forum, and I really appreciate you guys making your comments, because that's why we're here. And we wanna hear that. If Avangrid was having a meeting, I wanted to be in this auditorium too. Because there is two sides of the story, and there's this side too, and you guys were cordial and respectful, and I wanna thank you for that too. And very well framed questions.
Thank you very much.